Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we will cover if it is necessary to periodize hypertrophy training to maximize muscle growth. First, we need to establish what the term periodization means in the first place. There are many different methods and definitions of periodization, but for this video let's use this simple definition. Periodization is the strategic manipulation of training variables over time to achieve peak performance at a specific time. The concept of periodization comes from the athletic performance world, where the goal is to perform at your absolute best at certain times of the year. This is implemented because athletes cannot be in peak condition all year round. Rather, there are certain times of the year when the athletes are in poorer condition and times when they are able to perform at their best. The idea is that an athlete aims to reach these peak levels of performance at times when they need to. This may be for important competitions like the Olympic Games or World Championships. The basic concept of periodization is that athletes perform more general training further from their time to peak and more specific training as they get closer to their peak. This will build baseline foundational qualities earlier in the training cycle, which will then potentiate the more specific training. So athletic performance won't be the best earlier in the training cycle, but this should result in a supercompensation effect as they perform more specific training. Before we can explore if periodization is important to maximize muscle growth, we first need to understand what hypertrophy is. Hypertrophy essentially refers to an increase in muscle size. We won't go into the detail of the specific types of hypertrophy, we just need to understand that hypertrophy is an increase in muscle size. This primarily occurs via an increase in myofibrils in each muscle fiber. Myofibrils are the smallest contractile units of our muscles and are what contract to produce force. So as we increase the number of myofibrils in each muscle fiber, each fiber becomes bigger. And as each fiber increases in size, we end up with a bigger overall muscle. So what we have now established is that hypertrophy is ultimately a structural adaptation. This means it is simply a change in the structure of the muscle, not an increase in lifting performance. So the question is, do we need to periodize training to maximize muscle growth? In short, the answer is no, at least not in the traditional sense. Hypertrophy is not a performance outcome, which means there is no time to peak. We don't only want to maximize muscle growth at a certain time of the year, we want to continue growing muscle all the time. So the traditional form of periodization doesn't really apply to hypertrophy training. However, the concept of periodization may be somewhat relevant. It's not like we do the exact same mesocycle for our entire training career, we do adjust variables from time to time. We aren't adjusting variables to peak performance, but we are still trying to make training more effective over time. Sometimes we increase or decrease volume, change rep ranges and load, change exercises, training frequency, and more. But usually this isn't a pre-planned long-term strategy, we just change variables over time based on our response to the current training protocol and our specific context. Therefore, this could be considered periodization in a sense because we are technically manipulating training variables over time. However, the difference is that it has nothing to do with performance outcomes. So let's go through an example of how hypertrophy training can be periodized, or in other words, manipulated over time. Here is an example training program following a simple upper-lower split 4 days per week. This mesocycle is 4 weeks long, consisting of 1 deload week at the start of the mesocycle, followed by 3 overloading weeks. After completing this mesocycle, let's say the trainee wants to increase training volume for the arms, so they add an extra set of bicep curls and tricep extensions on each upper body session. In the next mesocycle, the trainee may want to change the leg press to a hack squat for some exercise variation. In mesocycle 4, the trainee may want to increase volume of the chest, so they add a set to each of the cable flies on each upper body session. In the following mesocycle, maybe the trainee is seeing great quad and hamstring development, but the calf muscles are lagging behind. So they reduce volume of the quad and hamstring exercises and increase calf volume. In the next mesocycle, the trainee may change the seated cable row exercise to a chest-supported row machine because the cable row is becoming stale. These are some examples of how hypertrophy training may be manipulated over time. While we aren't trying to peak performance, we are simply adjusting variables over time to make our training more effective. So rather than thinking about this as periodization, it is probably better to look at it as managing training. So what can we conclude from all this information? Well, in the classic sense, periodization is the strategic manipulation of training variables to achieve peak performance at a given time. This doesn't really apply to hypertrophy training because it is a structural adaptation, not a performance outcome. However, we still want to adjust our hypertrophy training program over time based on our individual response and specific context. We can make small changes to our program every mesocycle in the attempt to make our training program more effective. We can adjust variables like volume, exercise selection, rep ranges and loads, frequency, and more over time in order to continue growing muscle. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.